being provided for RDs and IBCLCs. To receive the CEUs, you need to be on the webinar today for the entire hour. You will also need to complete an evaluation to receive your CEU certificate. The evaluation will be emailed to all participants, and we appreciate your feedback. This webinar is being recorded, and access to the recording will be emailed to you tomorrow. You will find a link to the PowerPoint handout in the chat box on the right side of your screen. The PowerPoint handout will also be emailed to you tomorrow with the webinar recording. Please share the recording, the PowerPoint handout, and the infant feeding guide with your colleagues. The guide is unique to California and will aid in promoting consistent infant feeding recommendations across the continuum of care. We welcome questions throughout the presentation. Everyone is muted, so please type your questions into the chat box on the right side of your screen and choose to organizers and panelists. I would like to first introduce Suzanne Haydu. Suzanne is the Nutrition and Physical Activity Coordinator for the Maternal, Child, and Adolescent Health Division of the California Department of Public Health. Areas that she is passionate about are collaboration, breastfeeding, obesity reduction, folic acid, perinatal, and adolescent nutrition. She is a past president of the Association of Public Health Nutritionists and the first chair of the National Maternal Child Health Nutrition Council, and now is treasurer for the United States Breastfeeding Committee. Suzanne enjoys her free time as an abstract watercolor painter and doing hot yoga. I now present Suzanne Haydu to provide a brief introduction about the California Infant Feeding Guide.
Thank you, Robbie. So funding for the development of this California Infant Feeding Guide was provided by our Title V block grant funds, which we received from the Maternal and Child Health Bureau of the Health Resources and Services Administration. So the California Infant Feeding Guide is a revision to the 2008 Infant Feeding chapter of the California Food Guide, which was developed by the California Department of Health Services. This was actually before we split. We are now the California Department of Healthcare Services and the California Department of Public Health. This new version is a product of the Department of Public Health, and it is posted on our webpage. In 2015, I was lucky to be able to obtain the services of Ryan Gamba, who was working on his PhD in nutrition epidemiology at UC Berkeley. So he worked on two projects with me. One was an evaluation of lactation accommodation practices within the local health jurisdictions, and the second was to review literature and recommend updates to the older infant feeding chapter of the California Food Guide. So based on Ryan's literature review and recommended edits, we had experts, as is noted in the guide, we list them all out, review the drafts. The final draft was developed per review of our California Department of Public Health and Department of Healthcare Services experts, and then were reviewed and approved by our California Department of Public Health Management. Final consensus often required wordsmithing and conforming with national best infant feeding practices that may not have clear science behind them, such as waiting 3 days between adding new foods and use of pureed foods. The guidelines were negotiated and agreed to by participating California Department of Public Health programs. We hope that maintaining the California Infant Feeding Guide as a web-based document, that we will be able to modify it as the science changes. I would like now to introduce Ryan. Before pursuing graduate education, Ryan worked at both the Food Bank of Yolo County and WIC as a nutrition educator. He received his Master's of Public Health in Maternal and Child Health from the University of California, Berkeley, and his PhD from Berkeley in epidemiology. Ryan is currently a lecturer for the Department of Nursing and Health Sciences at Cal State University, Hayward. In addition to studying infant health, Ryan also studies the health effects of food insecurity and hunger. So Ryan, it's yours.
Great, thank you so much, Suzanne, I appreciate it. All right, so hopefully you can all see the first slide here, the California Infant Feeding Guide webinar we have. So my name is Ryan Gamba, and I'm really excited to go over the new version of the California Infant Feeding Guide today. So we have laid out some objectives for today. Briefly, we hope after this webinar you will know what the guide is and where to find it, some of the updates that have been made since 2008, and also be able to state 3 examples of feeding recommendations based on developmental stage. So we wanted to start off with a poll to get your feedback in regards to if you've read the guide or not. So please feel free to send in a quick response. We'll try to get the poll up in just a moment here. Okay, great. So you should be able to select one of the answers.
How is it looking, Sarah?
Almost everyone has voted. We're just waiting on a couple more. Just give it 10 more seconds.
All right, so I see the results now. We got about a quarter have read part of it, and just a couple have read it from cover to cover, so kudos to you, nice job. And then we have about 75%, or a little less, 32% was on their reading list. All right, so thanks for doing that. Just a heads up, we'll have a couple more polls today. It'll be more kind of a review of some of the content. Great. So on this slide, we have the link to where you can locate the infant feeding guide, and we'll also have this link near the end of the presentation as well. Throughout the webinar, we will have screenshots, such as this screenshot of the acknowledgement page on the right side of this slide. So we don't expect you to read each section, especially if there's a ton of information on the slide. But as I go over highlights, we wanted you to be able to see where in the guide I was pulling the information from. The purpose of the guide is to provide evidence-based recommendations for feeding healthy infants from age 0 to 1. It was developed for consumption by healthcare and public health professionals. So this guide promotes the normal infant feeding method, which is defined as exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life, followed by breastfeeding and the introduction of iron-rich complementary foods around age 6 months. So for this reason, breastfeeding recommendations are a focus of this infant feeding guide, but by no means is it just simply a guide about breastfeeding. So on the right of this slide, we have the table of contents. Today we will by no means cover every section in the guide. That would be a disastrously long webinar, but instead we will go through and highlight some of the new recommendations. All right, so just a few slides in, and already we are crossing off some objectives. You should know where to find the guide and its purpose. So not bad for a Thursday afternoon. Okay, so to start, breastfeeding remains the optimal food for human infants. Not much of a surprise. Often throughout the guide, we highlight recommendations from authoritative sources, as we do here. This section in the box on the lower right part of the slide highlights the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendation for exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life. So it recommends exclusive breastfeeding breastfeeding for about 6 months, followed by continued breastfeeding as complementary foods are introduced, with continuation of breastfeeding for 1 year or longer as mutually desired by mother and infant. So exclusive breastfeeding here refers to offering no other foods or fluids for infant feeding. So while the advice that breast is best is not new, we thought it was important to start with breastfeeding. As research that helps us understand how breast milk promotes health continues to grow. This research is on topics such as epigenetics and the gut microbiome, and personally I find it really fascinating. And for those who may not be familiar, epigenetics refers to changes in the way genes are expressed. And again, more and more evidence suggests food intake and breast milk may influence how genes are expressed to affect health. Again, while we know breast is best, the research that highlights the risks of not breastfeeding has also continued to grow. In this table, we highlighted at least one study that we thought provided quality evidence to suggest that not breastfeeding was associated with the poor health outcome listed. Now, I realize as you scan this table, you may feel that another condition that you thought was associated with not breastfeeding is missing. So it's important to note that this table is not exhaustive. There is research that has found associations between not breastfeeding and things like childhood leukemia, lymphoma, hypertension in adulthood, hypercholesterolemia, and others. However, reviews on these topics indicated the compilation of research was inconclusive, or there were just too few studies that found an association between the condition and not breastfeeding, that we felt it should not be listed here. So again, do want you to know there is definitely some subjectivity, and we fully acknowledge that this list is not exhaustive. Some of the new research that should be highlighted, well, starts off, if you look right below infant has a higher risk of, we start off with obesity in childhood, as there's been a proliferation of research regarding breastfeeding and childhood obesity. There's also been more research regarding breastfeeding and IQ and asthma. So we also now list these benefits here in Table 1, in addition to the benefits for the mother as well, as you can see, postpartum weight retention, depression, and different types of cancer. In this section of the guide, we've also added information regarding the economic and environmental benefits of breastfeeding, as more research has been done on this in recent years. So again, we spent quite a bit of time on this slide since it's really important, but the takeaways are there is quality evidence that suggests not breastfeeding can lead to the poor health outcomes that are listed here. The list doesn't cover everything, and the biggest updates from the last guide include not breastfeeding being associated with childhood obesity, asthma, and a lower IQ. So in the guide, we've also updated information regarding contraindications for breastfeeding. These include PKU, galactosemia, illicit drug use, and other contraindications. This section on HIV here was written by the Office of AIDS and provides some resources for those of you who may work with women who have HIV and are considering breastfeeding. I'm largely referring to the perinatal HIV hotline, which is at the bottom of the slide. So moving on, there's also a new recommendation that it is not mandatory to pump and dump after consuming alcohol in certain circumstances. So as long as an individual limits their alcohol intake, pumps before drinking, and waits at least 2 hours after drinking, a mother does not need to pump and dump. The limit put on alcohol intake is 0.5 grams alcohol per kilogram of body weight per day. Additionally, in regards to cigarette smoking, I would point out that this is not a contraindication to breastfeeding, but of course, we encourage women to stop or reduce smoking when breastfeeding. And to me, that's one really nice thing about this guide, is that it covers so much information about infant feeding, but it also often gives you some cited studies which you can examine and explore on your own. Moving on, we have updates in regards to marijuana and breastfeeding. So there's research that suggests THC and other compounds are found in breast milk after a mother has used marijuana, and therefore to try and to stop using marijuana if you choose to breastfeed. This information is consistent with what you see on the CDC website. Additionally, the NIH provides a resource that I found very helpful in the past, which helps people identify if a substance is a contraindication during breastfeeding, and that is included in the guide. So I'm referring to at the bottom of the slide again, the link there, the LACMED site, where you can go learn about if drugs are contraindications to breastfeeding. All right, before moving on to the Healthy People 2020 objectives, I'd like to do a quick recap of what we've covered so far, just really quickly. Breast remains the best. The research that analyzes how breast milk promotes optimum health continues to grow. Not breastfeeding is associated with an array of negative health outcomes. Some of the outcomes that have received more support from scientific literature recently include obesity in childhood, asthma, and lower IQ. It's no longer required that a breastfeeding mother pump and dump if they consume limited amounts of alcohol, pump before consuming alcohol, and wait 2 hours after consumption to breastfeed. Both cigarette and marijuana smoking are not advised during lactation, and the NIH provides a great resource on LACMED that can help mothers and practitioners identify drugs that are not safe to take during breastfeeding. All right, so now moving on to the 2020 objectives. The 2020 objectives are obviously new, and now they're listed in the guide. We call out 2 objectives in particular. The first is the MICH 21.1, that the proportion of infants who are ever breastfed should be increased to 81.9%. And the second is the MICH 21.4, that the proportion of infants, which is about in the middle of your slide, that the proportion of infants who are exclusively breastfed to 3 months should be increased to 46.2%. So highlighted 2 objectives, one that focuses on if a mother ever breastfed, and one that focuses on if a mother is exclusively breastfeeding at 3 months. So this first figure here, is the California in-hospital breastfeeding initiation percentages by race and ethnicity in 2015. So this first figure highlights that women from all racial ethnic groups included in the study were meeting MICH 21.1 in regards to breastfeeding initiation or ever breastfed, at least in California. As the red dotted line in the Healthy People 2020 objective is the Healthy People 2020 objective level of 81.9%. However, it is important to highlight that we observe racial disparities in the initiation rate, where Black women in particular have the lowest initiation rate. So in the guide, we do not discuss why this is, whether it be hospital practices, implicit bias, or any of the many reasons why this could be. But again, we feel this is an important thing to highlight as we see it in multiple instances when analyzing the prevalence of breastfeeding. So here, the second figure is about the prevalence of exclusive breastfeeding at 3 months among, again, California women by race ethnicity, this time in between across 2013 2014. In the second figure, we have the red dotted line, which now reflects the Healthy People 2020 objective for exclusive breastfeeding at 3 months, which is 46.2%. This figure shows that none of the racial ethnic groups have met this 2020 objective of exclusive breastfeeding at 3 months. So we still have some time though, let's not lose hope. The graph also shows that the racial disparities persist, so we've got some work to do. So now I'd like to see if we can check in with another poll question here, see how many people are able to follow along.
So about 70% of people have voted. I'll give it a couple more seconds.
Okay, great. So I see that about 50% of people are able to follow along and catch that in regards to figure 1, at least, which would be breastfeeding initiation rates or having ever breastfed, that all of women of different racial ethnic groups included in that study had met the 2020 objective. And it's kind of a trick. I see a fair amount of people said none, probably thinking that we were referring to the prevalence of exclusive breastfeeding at 3 months. Which that would be the correct answer. All right, we're going to go ahead and move forward. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to continue to highlight what is new from the guide. So one thing that is new is that we have made a section for banked human milk, where we clearly identify that this is the preferred substitute for mother's own breast milk. We also provided some information regarding different types of commercial infant formula. So here we have information regarding different types of formula and their predicted health benefits. So non-GMO formula, we could not identify a single study that analyzed the health benefits for non-GMO formula. Although online you can read that genetically modified ingredients upset a baby's stomach and all sorts of things. But again, we were unable to find any evidence to support these claims. When it comes to prebiotics in formula, we did find some studies that we listed here, but really not enough research has been done to definitively support a positive or negative association between using this formula and any health outcome. And then we have commercial infant formula with fatty acid supplementation, where there are some studies in non-human species suggesting that supplementing the diets of newborns with DHA and ARA may lead to positive neurodevelopment. However, these results have not been replicated in humans, so again, there's insufficient evidence for a statement for or against fatty acid supplementation of commercial infant formula at this time. I know it's frustrating not to have conclusive evidence about these claims, given all the advertising surrounding these claims, but this is the current state of the literature. Additionally, although not on this slide, we discussed how soy-based commercial infant formulas are not generally recommended and how they have not been shown to relieve colic, although you may often hear otherwise, again, in advertisements or media. Okay, moving forward, we have some new information regarding preparing water for formula. So we've included more information in this guide regarding where someone can go to determine if their water is safe to drink so that they can prepare formula safely. After Flint, I imagine this may be a question that is asked a little bit more often. So this section also highlights how the water should be prepared, including boiling for a minute and then cooling to room temperature. We've also added a new section on Contraindications infection. This is a rare infection that can occur when using powdered commercial infant formula. And if I were to make a test on the guide, this would be a question I would ask. This is something I did not know a lot about, how Contraindications infections were associated with preparing powdered commercial infant formula, but I think that is really important. We've included information here as well from the CDC about how to lower one's risk of this infection, including proper hygiene tips. And there's also, I know WIC has a lot of great information about preparing formula as well. So before moving on to baby cues, I do realize that when people listen to webinars, they may actually be multitasking. So again, I wanted to provide a quick recap. Regarding Healthy People 2020 objectives, we are currently meeting the objective that 81.9% of women are ever breastfed, at least in California. However, it appears we are not meeting the objective that 46.2% of infants are exclusively breastfed at 3 months, at least again in California. Additionally, the graph also illustrated the wide disparities we see in breastfeeding rates across different racial and ethnic groups that persist, whether or not we are meeting the Healthy People 2020 objective. We've called out in the guide that banked human milk is the preferred substitute for a mother's own breast milk. We have covered how there is very limited research regarding the added health benefits of formula that uses no genetically modified organisms, or formula with prebiotics, or formula with fatty acid supplementation. We have provided information on where one can go to determine if their water is safe to use in the preparation of formula. And finally, we just covered Conobacter infections and where one can go to receive tips on how to prevent the infection. Okay, great. So this slide here highlights the importance of paying attention to baby cues when bottle feeding. This is a concept that I think is well integrated into this guide. So this is related to the next slide here, which has the do's and don'ts bottle feeding. So we provide some do's and don'ts when bottle feeding to help parents with picking up on baby cues. Some of these that are new include holding the bottle horizontally to prevent milk from pouring into the infant's mouth and not letting the baby fall asleep with the bottle. And really, if you look through these do's and do nots, the bottom line is, if you are bottle feeding, feed it similarly to breastfeeding as possible. That's why we have things like, do provide skin-to-skin contact between caregiver and baby. Again, because really just trying to make the formula feeding or bottle feeding as similar to breastfeeding as possible. Here we have updated the nutrient requirements. So quickly, calcium has decreased from 210 to 200 milligrams per day for infants who are 0 to 6 months old, and also decreased from 270 milligrams to 260 milligrams per day for infants who are 7 to 12 months of age. So calcium is the first nutrient listed, the top left of the slide. And then also vitamin D. The vitamin D requirement doubled to now 10 micrograms per day for infants throughout the first year of life, so both 0 to 6 months and 7 to 12 months. And these new updates reflect adequate intake, the recommended average daily nutrient value. Table 4 here has information regarding mineral supplementation recommendations. This is just part of the table here. The new recommendations include vitamin D supplementation of 400 micrograms per day for breastfed infants, and also iron at 1 milligram per kilogram body weight per day, starting at 4 months for breastfed infants until they start complementary foods. Again, this is not the complete table, as we also offer information on fluoride and vitamin B12 supplementation as well, where fluoride supplementation for infants older than 6 months depends on the community water source. And we have a link for individuals to get information about the fluoride in their water. In regards to vitamin B12, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics recommends supplemental vitamin B12 for vegans and lacto-ovo-vegetarian mothers during both pregnancy and lactation to ensure that enough vitamin B12 is transferred to the fetus and infant. So now we've also updated some information regarding when to start complementary food. Now, you may have heard about evidence suggesting that starting complementary foods at 4 months may reduce the infant's potential for allergic reactions. Indeed, there is some research to support this claim. However, many review articles and many organizations suggest there is not enough evidence to support starting complementary foods at 4 months. We believe this is largely because even if there is sufficient evidence to suggest that starting complementary foods at 4 months leads to less allergic reactions. We know starting complementary foods at 4 months leads an infant to experience a higher risk of pneumonia, otitis media or ear infections, and gastrointestinal problems. So that information likely outweighs potential elevated risks for allergic reactions. We also have in this section a new part that discusses the importance of cultural norms in regards to infant feeding and how practitioners should consider cultural norms and support the use of appropriate cultural foods using culturally affirming language. So I think that's important to note. So again, we have another poll here. If you want to take a second to quickly submit your answer, we appreciate it.
About 70% have voted, so I'll give it a couple more seconds.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, great. So I see about 60% of people got that it was calcium and vitamin D are the two nutrients that have the requirements of which have changed in the newest version of the California Infant Feeding Guide. So good for you. And if you download the guide or look it up on the web, you'll never miss that question again.
Hey, Ryan, we have a question. Do you have the sources for the conclusion that iron supplements should be given at 4 months to exclusively breastfed infants?
As I'm looking at the slides right now, I do not, but I can, it looks like it's from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So I guess I could either follow up and email the person who has the question, or maybe at the end of the presentation take your time to look up the citation. Unless another panelist has something off the top of their head they'd like to add.
I'm just looking it up and see what the citation said.
You could go ahead, Ryan, and the Suzanne's lines that we included in the chat box.
Okay, great. And thanks for the question. Appreciate it.
Actually, I did look it up. So it was diagnosis and prevention of iron deficiency and iron deficiency anemia in infants and young children 0 to 3 years of age, pediatrics.
And we have another question. Says, most recently, the AAP recommended avoidance of 100% fruit juice for babies younger than 12 months, and juice is not provided in the WIC infant food package. Will the California Infant Guide be updated to reflect this, since it currently states if juice is given to babies 6 months or less older?
Great, thanks for that question. You're stealing the thunder a little bit. We haven't, sorry,
limit to 4 ounces.
We haven't quite gotten to the fluids during infant feeding, but we definitely have more emphasis here on limiting juice, which again is consistent with the changes in WIC in 2009. So I would say briefly the answer is yes. The California Infant Guide is in line with the recommendations from WIC and the American Academy of Pediatrics. All right, great. So I'm going to go ahead for now, and then we can do our best to kind of incorporate the questions or answer them either throughout or at the end. So, breastfeeding in the first week of life. In the guide, we've also provided more information now regarding the first week of life and what a parent can do to see if the baby is getting enough milk. I think this is great, as when I worked at WIC, this was often a concern. These tips include tracking weight and the number of diapers used, and understanding that the baby's stool will change in color and consistency over time. We also have information here regarding bottle use and how avoiding bottles in the first month of life may prevent something often called nipple confusion, which has the potential to make breastfeeding more challenging. Additionally, another new point of emphasis here is considering a baby's developmental stage when determining when to introduce solids, as both early and late introduction of solids can lead to poor health outcomes. All right. So we covered baby cues. Just a quick recap again. We covered baby cues while bottle feeding. The key takeaway was if you're bottle feeding, to feed as similar to breastfeeding as possible. We covered the increased adequate intake recommendations for calcium and vitamin D. We spent some time discussing the supplementation recommendations for healthy full-term infants, including vitamin D and calcium supplementation. We also touched on briefly when fluoride and vitamin B12 supplementation might be necessary. When discussing complementary foods, we highlighted that the recommendation is to wait until around 6 months, and how early introduction to complementary foods, while it may reduce one's risk of some allergic reactions, this potential benefit is outweighed by the evidence showing the increased risk of pneumonia, ear infections, and gastrointestinal problems associated with starting complementary foods at 4 months. So then we quickly provided tips for breastfeeding in the first week of life that were provided by WIC, such as tracking weight gain and the number of diapers used. Okay, great. So the current slide, here we provide more information on developmental cues at around 6 months. So there's information here regarding what an infant should be able to do to begin complementary foods, including sitting up with little or no support, being able to chew or gnaw objects, and transferring food from the front of the mouth to the back. It's important that caregivers remember all infants are different and to really focus on the infant's developmental stage. It is also important to note when a baby can self-feed finger food that they're ready to do so. In 2017, the American Academy of Pediatrics reported that there's no increase in choking when this is done. So now we're moving on to Table 5, which is about feeding recommendations for caregivers. Again, this is for healthy full-term infants according to the developmental stage and the nutrient needs. So we're going to spend some time going over Table 5, and then after Table 5, we'll just have a few more slides. So in this table, we describe the developmental stages, the approximate ages at which you may see these signs, and then information regarding feeding. So that's kind of the titles of the different columns you see here. A change to this section of the table was we used to put a limit of number of times an infant should be breastfed every day, and we have since removed that limit. We've also added information regarding early signs of hunger, such as a baby holding their hands near their mouth and making sucking noises. And we've also added information regarding infant cues of satiety. Cues of satiety at this age include turning or pushing away from the nipple. So those are just a couple things that we've added for infants from birth to 6 months. Moving forward with the table, now we're looking at around 6 months. We suggest trying new complementary foods at least 3 days apart. And Suzanne mentioned this kind of at the beginning of the webinar. Well, first, this is, kind of done to check for an adverse reaction to food. But there's not a lot of research surrounding this recommendation that we were able to find. But the recommendation to wait between 3 and 5 days is pretty consistent across organizations and experts. So back to our objectives at the beginning regarding developmental stages. A child should be able to hold their head steady around 6 months, and it's important that infants be able to do this when offering complementary foods. Okay, so here in this slide, we have developmental stage of begins to chew and sits with ease and without support. So again, back to our objectives, these are important abilities that an infant should be expressing around the age period given. If they have not reached the developmental stage, they may not be ready for the foods that are suggested at this time. Again, for this age, we also now include information on baby cues. So, for example, satiety cues at this age include changes in posture, tight closing of the mouth, distractibility, and playing with, or good old throwing utensils. So, again, we've kind of added more information here about, well, we have the developmental stages and also cues for hunger and satiety. So here now we're talking about infants 8 to 10 months of age. I just wanted to point out this slide that you may have seen this statement on the last couple slides regarding sugar, honey, etc. It's the last bullet under what to feed in the feeding recommendations to meet nutrient needs section. So kind of right in the middle of the slide. We're trying to highlight this fact that babies do not need extra sugar and salt in their diet. So again, we have that, sugar, honey, soy sauce, or salt does not need to be added. That comes up a lot throughout these sections of kind of what to feed. Also, we call out that we would hope an infant can really start to self-feed themselves finger foods by this time. And this will be helpful when introducing some of the baby bite-sized pieces of complementary food. So this is the last slide on table 5 here. We have updated a couple of things. One that I believe is important is how infants who are at risk of being overweight or have a family history of CDD or dyslipidemia should consume reduced fat milk at age 1, as opposed to the old recommendation of full fat milk for everyone. So kind of across table 5, we've highlighted the feeding recommendations for caregivers of healthy full-term infants according to developmental stage and nutrient needs. An example of this is an infant being able to hold their head steady before they should be offered complementary foods. We also highlighted baby cues of hunger and satiety in the first year of life. So those are just some of the things we've done to update table 5. Now I'd like to move on to a couple other important topics, one of which is food allergies. So regarding food allergies, we have added anise tea as something to avoid due to the potential for seizures and other bad health outcomes. We also highlight the foods that are often associated with allergic reactions, including cow's milk, whole eggs or egg whites, wheat, tree nuts, finfish and shellfish, and legumes such as soybeans and peanuts. We also provided some information here from the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology, including about how allergic reactions can vary. Mainly, some reactions are immediate and some are not. And also the recommendation that highly allergenic complementary foods be introduced after a few non-allergenic complementary foods have been fed and tolerated. Also updated some information regarding potential contaminants in infant foods. So we've added BPA, or bisphenol A, as a substance to avoid, as the use of BPA in baby bottles and cups was banned by the FDA in 2012. We also provided some information on arsenic in rice cereal. Some organizations such as the, some organizations such as the American Academy of Pediatrics suggest infants consume a variety of grains for a well-balanced diet, including infant rice cereal, as levels of inorganic arsenic is within acceptable levels. So a couple highlights there. And now I wanted to get to fluids during infant feeding. So in the guide, we now highlight how breastfed infants receiving supplementary food, receiving supplementary fluids have a lower intake of breast milk than if they are exclusively breastfed, and are also more likely to be breastfed for shorter periods. So in Table 6 here, we discuss specific fluids during infant feeding. There's more of an emphasis here on limiting juice we touched on earlier, which is consistent with WIC's change in 2009, not to offer juice for infants, and also consistent with the growing research that shows high sugar beverages or sugar-sweetened beverages can lead to excess weight gain. Information regarding the importance of avoiding herbal supplements and teas is also included in Table 6. Although I've often heard how teas may improve colic, we found no evidence in the literature that teas have indeed helped with colic. Again, this portion of Table 6 is just a portion. It's not the entire picture in regards to fluids during infant feeding, but has a couple of the highlights.
Do you want to take a quick break for a few questions on that section?
Sure. I'm pretty close to wrapping up, but okay, go for it.
Okay. We had a couple comments on honey. Someone said, shouldn't it be that honey is not recommended before a year? Another one said, you say honey is not needed, but isn't still recommended to positively not feed honey in the first year due to botulism risk? If so, the guide statement sounds too frighteningly permissive. And another that says honey does not need to be offered is a very weak statement, tends to lead the reader that it is possibly okay to do so. So I don't know if you want to touch on the honey issue.
Okay, great. So I understand where people are coming from. I think this is, maybe the wording should be a little bit more direct because we don't want any ambiguity about people offering honey before an infant might be ready.
This is Suzanne. I was just going to say, I'm taking some notes on this because we can look at that. We've actually, some articles have come out and we have gone back and re-looked at this infant feeding guide. So these are good points for us to go back and look at.
And then one on infant rice cereal, it says avoid or is it safe to consume?
Oh, infant rice cereal is safe to consume. The recommendation is to try to have a balance of different grains. At least that was one of the recommendations that we highlighted. But it's, rice cereal is safe to consume.
And then someone's asking if you can elaborate about early introduction of peanut butter to prevent allergy.
So allergies, there's some conflicting evidence. So it's kind of hard to really take an evidence-based approach to be able to say this is what should be done. So I don't know how much I feel comfortable really. I don't really know, like there's not a specific time that's been proven to be an optimal time to introduce something like peanut butter. So I don't know how much I can add there.
This is Suzanne. I think if there's not a family risk of peanut allergy, that you can start right after 6 months.
Thanks, Suzanne. Is there another question or two?
There's several more, but I don't know if you want to wait until wrap it up for those.
Yeah, I'll just
why don't you let them finish?
Yeah, not just a couple more slides.
Okay.
Thanks. All right. So just going to do, quick recap. We talked about some of the problematic foods, milk, eggs, wheat. We just talked about peanuts. We discussed how allergic reactions may be immediate or delayed. We called out BPA as something to be avoided and echoed the American Academy of Pediatrics suggestion for infants to consume a variety of grains for a well-balanced diet, including infant rice cereal. We also talked about fluids during infant feeding, limiting juice, limiting or avoiding tea, and how other supplementary fluids can make breastfeeding more challenging or lead to negative health outcomes. And here we highlight the barriers to breastfeeding in this slide. So a lot of these are very similar to what they were in 2008. We continue to see more research, however, that highlights these barriers. So, for example, research on the importance of social support in choosing to breastfeed. There's also more research now on the effectiveness of breast pump programs and having less formula available in hospitals So there's some good research that's being done here in this area. So as we close here, we have the Surgeon General's 20 recommended actions to promote optimum infant feeding through public health action, which is also included in the guide. And a quick summary of some of the points we talked about. Briefly, there have been many changes in infant feeding since the last guide in 2008, and hopefully this guide can help you maneuver some of these changes. Again, I think it's important to really understand that this guide is focused on infants from 0 to 1 that are, normal, healthy infants, and also to consider that each individual infant's development should be considered when considering their feeding. And then I just wanted to quickly thank all of the reviewers and all of the people who worked on the guide, and Suzanne and Robbie and others that have helped or gave me an opportunity to work on this with them. I really appreciate it. And finally, clearly we're not done. We got a lot of questions, and also I know Suzanne has an announcement to make. But wanted to thank you all for listening. And we got some hot news for you all, that there are plans to translate all or part of this guide into Spanish and Chinese, so we're really excited about that. And then I'll go ahead and, Suzanne, I don't know if you want to make your announcement now or if you want to do it after questions, but that's it for me.
I'll give it right now in case some people are getting off. So today we are releasing, the Department of Public Health is releasing the 2016 hospital level data tables. These are from the newborn screening programs, the California in-hospital infant feeding practices. So this is the data that Ryan showed for initiation data. He showed 2015 data, and we now have the 2016 data. So we haven't even emailed this out. It's going out today, so you might want to write this down to get the latest data. So I just wanted to make that announcement and say Happy World Breastfeeding Month. Okay, Ryan.
Great, thank you. So now I guess we can try to entertain some questions.
Okay, so we have a comment that just says, great that this new guide doesn't use the term solid foods. And then a question, I thought we were going more to meat sources of iron earlier because of its advantages over fortified grains in absorption, etc. Arsenic is certainly another concern.
Well, I can speak from my experience. I have not seen a lot of research that shows, comparing complementary foods and something like infant rice cereal versus meat in terms of what's, quote unquote better or a healthier option. But that's an interesting thing, and maybe I'll look at the most recent research to see if we've missed anything there. But I don't know, Suzanne, do you have anything to add?
I wasn't quite sure what the question was. They were concerned about giving rice cereal as a first food because of arsenic as a source of iron. Was that it?
Well, I'm concerned about arsenic, so just wondering if meat would be a better source of iron because of the way it absorbs. I think over fortified.
Of course, we know that there's heme iron in meat, and it is better absorbed. Now it's a personal. A lot of people don't want to feed meat to their child, so you would have to look at fortified or other alternative sources of iron.
Someone says, can you discuss a bit on introduction of probiotic supplements for infants above 1 year old?
Unfortunately, I cannot. I would focus really everything from 0 to 1, so I didn't look at research beyond, age 1, and all I saw was the prebiotics and infant formula, essentially that the research is inconclusive to suggest that if it's a benefit or potentially harmful, we don't know.
Someone says, I think early offering of allergic foods is more for breastfeeding babies, not formula fed.
What was that question?
I think early offering of allergic or allergenic maybe foods is more for breastfeeding babies, not formula fed.
That you would avoid, or I don't.
I think the
I think it would be equal.
Another one, back to the iron supplementation at 4 months. Has anyone looked at disadvantages due to iron decreasing effectiveness of lactoferrin? Unresearched unintended consequences?
Potentially, I haven't seen anything in that regard.
Why aren't soft fruits and soft vegetables included with the description of introductory soft foods?
You know, this was a whole area that was very controversial because at the time there was a lot of movement towards, you know, feeding baby solids starting at 6 months, and then the risk of choking, and the studies were kind of mixed. So we kind of, I think we started out with soft foods in the first, or pureed foods in the first month, and then started saying you could start adding solids. But actually, that's an area that we may edit. This year, the Academy of Pediatrics came out saying that there was no difference in choking risk for those feeding starting with pureed and or those starting with solids. So it was very interesting. So we'll have to look at that.
Okay. Doctors are advising to not serve rice cereal. How to advise mothers?
Whenever I get questions about doctors, I usually defer to a doctor because they have information about the individual patient or baby. But the recommendation from the guide is to, you know, infant rice cereal is the appropriate food to eat or consume around 6 months.
Do we know if there will be changes to the WIC program, such as not giving juices and cereals?
I do not know.
Yeah, this is out of our expertise.
Bobby, I don't know if you want to address that one or.
Oh, the WIC food package is determined by the federal government, and so I would encourage people to get involved at the federal level when that comes up for reauthorization or changes are looked at the WIC food package. It is evidence-based, and I believe they have a committee looking at the WIC food packages.
I do know that the committee received a lot of feedback this last time around to that effect, that people would like to see juices and cereals out of the WIC food package. Is it really okay to serve peanut butter under 1 year?
Yes.
When supplementing with powdered formula, how long do parents need to boil water? The age of infant. Not sure.
Did we give them the CDC link in the guide?
Yeah, I think, yeah, we did. Or we have a link, I think it's to the CDC that talks about preparing formula and doing so. And I think the recommendation is to, you know, boil for a minute and then be sure to let it cool to room temperature.
2 questions.
Are there any? Oh, okay, go ahead. We're at 1 o'clock. If there's 2 last questions.
Okay, we still have several, but this one says 2 questions, please. One, for infant born premature, for example, let's consider a baby born 3 months premature. Do the age recommendations still apply, i.e. 6 months postnatal age to start solids and 1 year postnatal to start whole milk, etc.?
You're talking about preemie?
Yeah.
Actually, we don't even address preemies in this infant feeding guide. It's only for your normal average baby. It's not at any special risk infant. So.
And question 2, there is a great deal of discussion around the overwhelming and undeniable evidence that a low-fat diet is not associated with long-term health benefits, such as cardiovascular disease, obesity, etc. I realize the major advising organizations have not yet changed their stance on low-fat diets, such as low-fat milk, but is there any discussion about allowing children to eat whole-fat products past age 2, since we've known a high-fat diet is critical to infant brain development?
I think that's an interesting question, but again, we really focus from 0 to 1. So, in general, low-fat diets, I don't feel I'm spent all the time I would need to spend looking at research and analyzing it to be able to come up with a good response or an evidence-based response.
If breastfeeding moms take prenatal vitamins with iron while breastfeeding, won't that meet the iron needs of the infant?
No. They would have to.
No.
They'd have to have very, very high amounts, and I think that there's few situations where people have done that, but it's like telling people to eat enough folic acid, on their own without getting fortified. It's just really hard.
We still have a lot of questions. Would you like me to keep going?
I would like to be able to provide Ryan and Suzanne's emails, because this report is online. The guide's on the internet, and we now have the ability to change it and make revisions. Suzanne, how would you like comments just directly emailed to you?
Sure, that would be fine.
I can,
and questions?
And if you're okay with it, can I just send your email addresses to the whole, to everybody?
Sure.
Yeah, works for me.
Thank you all for the great questions and the input, and we really appreciate your participation. I want to thank Ryan and Suzanne and Sarah, and please relay your comments and questions to Suzanne. We also ask that you please fill out the evaluation, and thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.